Good morning. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. We're here because something deeply alarming is happening in this country. Billionaires are attacking our government. They're dismantling it, gutting it, and trying to sell it for profit. And one of their first targets is our homes. As working class people and communities of color across the country are struggling just to pay rent, millions more are facing eviction, overcrowding, and rising homelessness. Meanwhile, Elon Musk and his allies are slashing affordable housing programs and pushing policies that deepen the crisis. This isn't a coincidence, it's a strategy. And we're here to say not on our watch. On Tuesday, May 20th, we're fighting back. Dozens of grassroots community organizations from states across the country, representing tens of thousands of tenants and homeowners, are coming together to stop HUD cuts and confront the billionaires who helped create this housing emergency. We're demanding real solutions: rent control, permanently affordable social housing, and a government that actually works for people, not for profit. We can't allow the housing crisis to continue to be normalized in the wealthiest country on earth. The US has more than enough resources to guarantee safe, dignified homes for all, yet people are sleeping in cars, in tents, and overcrowded conditions while luxury condos sit empty. This is a result of policies and deliberate choices made by people in power. So on May 20th, we're calling on them to choose differently. In Washington, D.C., Right to the City Alliance will join with People's Action Institute, Popular Democracy, and Vocal US, as well as the National Homeless Law Center, for a major rally. More than 500 tenant leaders will demand Congress stops the cuts to HUD and fund housing justice. We'll be joined by Representatives Delia Ramirez and Rashida Tlaib, and other powerful voices who are standing with us. And this is just one part of a national wave of actions on May 20th. Across the country, from Vallejo, California, to Tucson, Arizona, Memphis, Tennessee, Atlanta, all the way back to Boston, community organizations will hold local actions and speak out for the housing solutions their cities desperately need. But before May 20th, we're here today to hear from a few of the tenant leaders and organizations powering this movement forward. You're about to hear from Riddhi Singh, the New York State Tenant Block of the New York State Tenant Block, about their rally that's happening today for a rent freeze in New York, from Jesse Rabinowitz, who is the campaign and communications director at the National Homeless Law Center, who will be discussing the fight against anti-homelessness laws and the struggle to win housing that solves homelessness. From Rich Johnson, a member of United Tenants of Albany and a homeless leader of the National Union of the Homeless, discussing the impact of homelessness and the importance of Section 8. From Isaac Simon Hodes, a leader at Lynn United for Change, about their distributed action happening in Boston. From Cristal Gallegos, a tenant leader from Vallejo Housing Justice Coalition, about their distributed action happening in California. And from Katie Goldstein, the director of housing and healthcare campaigns at Popular Democracy, about the rally happening in Washington, D.C. This is about housing. Dignified, safe, permanently affordable housing. This is about stabilizing, not displacing communities just to make a profit. So we're organizing, we're united, and we're not backing down. Thank you again to everyone for coming. And now let's hear from the people on the front lines of this fight. So I will start with Riddhi Singh, representing the New York State Tenant Block. Over to you.
Thank you so much, and thank you everybody for being here. My name is Riddhi Singh. I am with the New York State Tenant Block, and we are building a 250,000 strong tenant block across the state, organized, aligned, and ready to take control over our homes. So I'm a tenant. I'm actually a rent-controlled tenant, and I'm happy to talk later about what it's like to have the most stability I've ever had in my adult life. But being a tenant is not unusual in New York. Tenants are half of New York State. We're a majority in every major city. And not just New York. We're talking about Rust Belt cities like Buffalo, Syracuse, Rochester, where I'm from. And New York does not run without tenants. We are cooks, cleaners, bus drivers, social workers, teachers, We keep the state running, but high rents are pushing us out. We know that homes should be for rest. They should be for family. They should be for community. It's where I go after a really long, hard day of work, of which there are many. It's where folks are raising their kids. It's where we're connecting with our neighbors. But right now, landlords and developers are treating them like unlimited profit machines. And that's why rents keep going up. That's why I'm not getting the repairs I need done. And that's why so many are getting forced out of their homes and often into homelessness. But tenants are half the state. We are a majority in every major city, and this isn't just about New York. Tenants are over a third of the country, and our numbers are rising in nearly every part of the country. So we have sheer power in numbers to take control over our homes and change the policies that are shaping our lives every day. That's why we're fighting for rent control, which will make rents affordable, and for social housing so that we can build housing for everybody, not just the rich. That's going to be done by treating it as a public good instead of a vehicle for private profits. This isn't theoretical. We're winning these measures. So in 2019 in New York, we won massive expansions to rent control, not just that, making it even stronger. Last year, we won good cause eviction, which has been the biggest expansion of tenant rights in New York since 1974. It means nearly 1 million renters are now, they can rest easy without being afraid that their landlord is going to kick them out just to make more money. And we're seeing these rises, not just in New York. Good cause is getting passed across the country, rent control measures getting passed across the country. But New York also has a 100-year-long history of building social housing, housing that people are still living in stably to this day. These aren't right or left issues. These aren't about Democrats versus Republicans. These have bipartisan support. So our polling has found that in New York, 89% of Democrats and 63% of Republicans support social housing. And 88% of Democrats and 75% of Republicans across the state back rent control. It doesn't matter where you live or what your political orientation might be. We can all agree that the rent is too damn high and it's time to do something about it. So I'm not talking about, so this movement is growing right now. We're still fighting. What's next is right now we have launched a campaign to win a rent freeze for over 2.4 million tenants. We have launched bills to expand rent control, strengthen it even more, build social housing, take properties out of the hands of slumlords and put them into public stewardship. And this is happening right now. Since February, we have brought together 15,000 united tenants to demand a rent freeze for over 2.4 million New Yorkers. And tonight, over 500 of us are going to rally at Riverside Church, where Martin Luther King spoke in 1967, to make it clear that New York belongs to the people who keep it running. This rent freeze is just the beginning. And we are so excited to be part of a national movement, rallying and fighting back against HUD cuts, against housing for profit instead of for public good on May 20th. So thank you so much for having me. And I hope that if you are in New York, you're able to come out tonight, Thursday, 6 p.m. at Riverside Church. And I'll pass it back to Kamal.
Thanks, Riddy. And now we are going to hear from Jesse Rabinowitz. Again, Jesse is the Campaign and Communications Director at the National Homeless Law Center. Over to you, Jesse.
Thanks so much. As was just mentioned, my name is Jesse, and I'm the Campaign and Communications Director at the National Homelessness Law Center. I also direct the Housing Not Handcuffs campaign. 2 weeks ago, I was in Oregon witnessing the largest eviction of a homeless community by the federal government in recent history. Donald Trump forced nearly 200 homeless people from one forest to another, destroying communities, trashing belongings, and making it harder to solve homelessness in Oregon. What happened there was unique in scale, but not unique in practice. Cities and states across the country keep recycling the same failed policies of jails, fines, and displacement to make homelessness less visible, but this will never actually work. We will never address homelessness by throwing people in jail, destroying their belongings, or giving them fines. Homelessness is not caused by a lack of ways to punish people who have no choice but to sleep outside. Rather, homelessness is caused by the dire lack of housing that people can afford. 50% of renters struggle to pay rent. 1 in 4 people worry about becoming homeless in the very near future, and 1 in 5 people spend 100% of their income on rent. This is not a housing system that works for most people. More and more people struggle to make ends meet and are one missed paycheck away or illness away from homelessness. Homelessness is a policy failure, not a personal choice. Donald Trump, the Republican Congress, and their billionaire cronies are trying to make homelessness worse. Let's be clear, the right wing's proposed starvation budget will guarantee more people will have no choice but to sleep outside, that more families will struggle to get by, and that the rich will get richer while everybody else struggles to pay the rent. These cuts will hurt us all, but will hurt Black people, communities of color, queer and trans people, and migrants first and worst. More than 9 million people could be at risk of homelessness if federal rental assistance is eliminated. Proposed cuts would force an additional 166,000 households currently in housing that solves homelessness back on the streets. Millions of households could lose rental assistance, face eviction, and be forced into homelessness due to cuts and changes to vital rental assistance. And what's their solution? More of what happened 2 weeks ago in Oregon. Since the Supreme Court shamefully said that cities and states can ticket and arrest people for sleeping outside, even when they have nowhere else to go, they have done just that. In the past 10 months, 162 cities have passed new laws that make it illegal to be homeless, and 93 additional new laws are pending. Earlier this week, Gavin Newsom rolled out his anti-homeless agenda that will make homelessness worse in California, waste taxpayer money, and make all Californians less safe. States across the country are passing cookie-cutter bills pushed by the Cicero Institute, a billionaire-backed think tank with deep ties to the Trump-Musk administration. Trump, Newsom, and politicians around the country are using the same failed playbook in an attempt to demonize people pushed into homelessness by the out-of-control housing market. Politicians are trying to pass the buck and deflect blame for their failure to do their jobs and ensure that we all have our basic needs met by placing the blame on those most impacted by the housing crisis, people who sleep outside. Fortunately, most people aren't buying it. According to a recent poll from the ACLU, 77% of voters say that we need to address homelessness as a resource issue, focusing on improving access to affordable housing and services, compared to just 23% of voters who say that we need to address homelessness as a public safety issue. We need more housing and support that people can afford, not the Trump plan of less housing and more government-run detention camps for homeless people. Cutting budgets and passing laws that make it illegal to be homeless make us all worse off. By ensuring that everybody has a safe place to live, we can build a healthier, safer, and more equitable community. It is beyond time for housing, not handcuffs. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Jesse. And now we are going to hear from Rich Johnson, who is a member of United Tenants of Albany and a leader with the National Union of the Homeless. So, Rich, I will hand it over to you.
Hi, my name is Richard Johnson. I'm a member of the National Union of the Homeless Albany chapter. United Tenants is hosting a rally at City Hall for the at 10 a.m. on the 20th. For rent control levels of, in addition, there will be an Assemblywoman Gabriela Romero will be sending a speaker to speak on behalf of the rally. As a whole, an evictions in the city of Albany and housing for all. 63% of the residents pay 30% of their income, and more 50%, and is a burden for some to stay on Section 8 and housing with the cuts. Rent of a studio apartment is $1,074. $1,074, which is 60% of their income. Living in apartments in the city needs some Section 8 public housing. And I've been homeless for 2 years. And the housing, we ended up winning the housing access vouchers, but it's still not enough. We need more available housing in the Albany area. Homeless. Been fighting for control and systems. Just a week ago, we won the housing access vouchers, and it's threatened the budget, or even the vouchers. That's why I'm fighting for the HUD.
Yeah.
To keep HUD, and at the state, the federal level gives homeless across the state.
Thank you, Rich. And before we go to our next speaker, I just wanted to name that folks can feel free to put questions in the chat. We're also going to have about 10 or 15 minutes towards the end for a Q&A, and we'll be able to follow up with folks if you're interested in doing one-on-one interviews with any of the speakers. And yes, with that, I'll pass it over to Isaac Simon Hodes, a leader at Lynn United for Change, to talk about how they're throwing down in Boston. Isaac, over to you.
Good morning. My name is Isaac Simon Hodes. As Kamal said, I'm Executive Director of Lynn United for Change, a community-based organization here in Lynn, Massachusetts. Our group is a member of the Homes for All Massachusetts Coalition, which is organizing a march and rally next Tuesday evening in Boston as part of the National Housing Day of Action. The Homes for All Mass action on Tuesday is going to begin outside the federal building in Boston because we just cannot let Donald Trump and his billionaire class allies throw our friends, our families, and our neighbors out of their homes. And that's what it boils down to. That's what the cuts proposed in the Trump budget would mean. Here, we're already seeing negative impacts right at this moment from the chaos and the cuts the Trump administration has brought up to this point. At the local level, we're hearing from housing authorities about austerity plans they've been ordered to make to prioritize which families would get their housing choice vouchers revoked first as funding gets pulled. What's already happening is horrific, but the cuts proposed in the Trump budget would be completely apocalyptic for our communities. We can't let this happen. And the right place to be at this moment is in the streets saying, hell no, you are not going to throw even more of our neighbors into homelessness. We know the fight for housing justice doesn't end with stopping the attack on existing federal housing programs. So our action won't end at the federal building. Our communities are facing a housing emergency, and we're marching up to the State House to demand that our state government stop blocking the only policy that can address that emergency quickly enough and broadly enough to make a real difference. That policy is rent control, and our communities need it now. Back in 1994, the real estate industry here in Massachusetts engineered a statewide ban on local rent stabilization policies. For years, we've been pushing our state government to act to overturn that ban and let our cities and towns take action to protect our neighborhoods. And we can't wait any longer. Rent control is desperately needed in big cities like Boston, but it's also needed in smaller cities across the state, just like my hometown of Lynn on Boston's North Shore. Earlier this week, I was sitting with a tenant at her kitchen table here in Lynn, talking about a $400 a month rent increase that her absentee landlord is trying to impose. She barely has enough hours in the day as it is, but she thought about How can she handle this? Could she get yet another job? Could she work even longer shifts? Even with those changes, she'd probably fall behind. But what was left unspoken in that conversation, um, to me, is heartbreaking. What else would she lose by trying to take on that extra job? She'd have to stop her English classes. She'd be less involved in her church and community groups that she plays an important role in. She'd have less time to be the caring and very involved mom that her two young daughters need. That's the thing about rent stabilization. We're not fighting for a policy in the abstract. We're fighting for our families and neighbors and the survival of our communities, because massive increases in displacement really do cause irreversible damage. A huge rent increase or eviction is just a blip on a spreadsheet for corporate landlords. But on the ground, it means people unable to leave abusive relationships because they can't afford to move. It means kids getting yanked out of schools when their families get evicted. It means harm to health. It means homelessness. And at the communal level, it means destabilizing whole neighborhoods, stripping social capital. It means destroying historic working class communities and neighborhoods of color. It means the loss of the networks of support and the unique cultures that those neighborhoods embody. And I want to close with saying that it really says something about the depth of the housing crisis, that here in Massachusetts, in a so-called blue state, we're facing not just massive rent increases and displacement, we're also facing drastic cuts to the state's emergency shelter program for unhoused families. We're facing camping bans in one city after another. All of this pushed by a governor, a legislature, and local governments that claim there's no alternative. We know there is an alternative, and that's why, as we fight for rent control and a stop to the federal cuts, we're also looking to the long term for the funding of social housing, of high quality public housing, of CLTs, community land trusts, and co-ops that we know are the real solution to putting people before profit and creating housing as a human right.
Thank you, Isaac. Um, and now we're going to hear from Cristal Gallegos, who is a leader with Vallejo Housing Justice Coalition, about their action happening on the 20th in California.
Thank you, Kamal. Good morning. My name is Cristal Gallegos again with Vallejo Housing Justice Coalition. I want to start by saying Vallejo is in crisis, and we're sounding the alarm on Tuesday the 20th at 5 p.m. where tenant organizers and community leaders will gather at the steps of City Hall for a press conference and rally as part of a National Day of Action for Housing Justice. Vallejo is joining cities across the country to demand what our communities urgently need: rent control, and in our city, just cause evictions protections, and an end to displacement. We know that rent control is not just policy, it's survival. Right now, Vallejo residents are being pushed out of their homes by skyrocketing rents and unjust evictions. People are sleeping in cars, couch surfing, or ending up on the streets, not because they did something wrong, but because our city has failed to act. Rent control and just cause protections are the first line of defense to keep people housed and stabilize our neighborhoods. In Vallejo, we have a unique opportunity to pass strong tenant protections, starting with rent control this fall. We cannot ignore the human cost of inaction. James Oakley II, a Vallejo resident, was crushed to death by a backhoe while unhoused. That is the brutal reality of housing insecurity in our city. And his death was preventable, let us be clear. He should still be alive. If James had stable, affordable housing, this tragedy might have never happened. And this is why we're fighting, because no one should die for a lack of home. Vallejo's a frontline city in a national fight. And across the country, we're rising up to demand these protections against displacement and corporate landlord greed, which we see growing more and more in Vallejo. We know Vallejo is not alone, but we are uniquely vulnerable, a historically disinvested city with working class Black, brown, and immigrant communities that have been ignored for far too long. We refuse to let that continue. From Vallejo to New York to our nation's capital, we're rising up because the time for action is now. We're calling on the Vallejo City Council and city staff to enact strong, enforceable rent control and just cause protections without delay, without watering them down. We know that studies and task Forces don't keep people housed. Policy does, action does. We need bold solutions that get at the root of the housing crisis. And this means investing in social housing, permanently affordable, community-controlled homes that are shielded from the speculative, violent market. Housing should not be a commodity for Wall Street. It should be a public good. We need homes for people, for not profit. So we're asking folks here in Vallejo to join us May 20th. We're fighting for our lives. This Tuesday, it's really not just a rally, it's a declaration. We're here, we're organized, and we're not backing down. We stand in the memory of James Oakley II and in defense of every tenant struggling to stay in their home. We're building the Vallejo we deserve, where housing is permanent, people come before profit, and no one gets left behind. And we know that Vallejo deserves a future where housing's a human right and not a death sentence.
Thank you, Crystal. And to close us out before we get to the Q&A portion, we're going to hear from Katie Goldstein, the Director of Housing and Healthcare Campaigns at Popular Democracy, about the rally in Washington, where all of our organizations are going to be coming together to take collective action on the 20th. Katie, over to you.
Thanks, Kamau, and good morning, everyone. Again, I'm Katie Goldstein. I'm the Director of Housing and Healthcare Campaigns for Popular Democracy. We are a national network of 50 powerful organizations across the country who are building power with Black, Brown, immigrant, and working class communities to end racial capitalism. The top issue our affiliates organize is housing. Our affiliates members know that the housing market doesn't work for them. It's exclusionary, racist, the rent is too damn high, and they mostly don't live in their homes with security and dignity. Housing as a commodity has caused this problem, which is why we go after corporations and the elected officials that enable their policies. Our members have a solution to the housing crisis. They and we know that the solution is that housing isn't a commodity, but that it is decommodified and out of the private market as a public good. We achieve that through passing policies, legislation, and funding for social housing and universal rent control, and taking away properties from corporate bad actors into the hands of the people. Housing is a top concern across the country for voters in every single community, and homelessness is skyrocketing. So on May 20th, 500 tenants and homeless folks are taking over the Capitol in DC to say, stop the HUD cuts, save our homes, and end tax breaks for billionaires. The last thing our nation needs is a sledgehammer to federal spending on affordable housing and services for the unhoused. Yet the president is proposing to slash the HUD budget by $33.6 billion, which is 44% of its total funding. That would mean half of all vouchers that currently exist. These cuts would eliminate funding for rehousing people experiencing homelessness, drastically cut or eliminate funds for vouchers, public housing, subsidize affordable housing, removing lead poisoning, community development, fair housing, and more, and also roll back tenant protections. These proposed HUD cuts impact millions of families. They will push people out of their homes and into the streets. The last time our nation saw unprecedentedly massive HUD cuts in the 1980s, mass homelessness of men, women, and children exploded. And what's more, the impact of HUD cuts will ripple far beyond those who directly live in subsidized housing. Gutting public and subsidized affordable housing will exacerbate housing price increases across the country as landlords hike rents to take advantage of people with extremely limited options. And billionaires are seizing control of the federal government to advance their greedy agenda at our expense. Already under the pressure from Elon Musk's Doge, HUD has lost 2,300 staff members, which is 23% of its workforce. Doge arbitrarily canceled the HUD contracts of affordable housing providers serving low-income, elderly, and formerly unhoused people. Now the president is also seeking a $4.5 trillion tax cut for billionaires. So on May 20th, we're going to be rallying at the Capitol with allies with one of the largest mobilizations of tenants and houseless folks in DC to ever happen. And we're going to say no more cuts to our homes and communities. Thanks so much. And if you're in DC, please join us. And I'll pass it back to you, Kamau.
Thank you, Katie. So we have heard from folks across the country today about what is on the line for all of us if cuts to HUD continue. Um, we've heard about how tenants are making up at least a third of this country, and a lot of them are struggling to pay their rent already as is. We know that cuts to HUD mean not just small cuts. These are not small tweaks and edits. It's 44% of the HUD budget being at risk. That's millions of people who are already living in housing precarity are at risk of homelessness. We are hearing about how it's not just cuts to HUD that are happening. Emergency shelter is being cut. And that means people are being squeezed on both ends, not just from these public programs that are helping them to stay in their homes, but also if those end, they are facing astronomical rent hikes, which mean they're going to have to shift whether they are able to pay for housing or spend time with their family, whether it's paying for housing or paying for medication, whether it's paying for housing or being displaced from communities where they've been for generations and generations, and how this is impacting working class people and communities of color on the front lines every day. Already, we know decision makers are pressuring institutions to prioritize who will be blocked from access to affordable housing. And instead of these cuts, what we need is more investment into affordable housing. We need to be investing into HUD, into programs like Section 8. We need more housing vouchers, not less, because housing has not become more affordable in the time that we are in right now. So the things that our folks are demanding from coast to coast, from DC, from big towns, from small towns and large cities alike are for rent control, for stabilization for communities so they can afford to stay in their homes in the communities and neighborhoods that they have helped to build. We hear that people are calling for social housing, and this is not a new or controversial idea because it has existed in many places, including in New York, for a long time. And that simply means permanently affordable, long-term, stable housing for people to stay in the places where they have built up their homes. And we are hearing that people are doing that on all fronts. So we're doing it on the federal level. Folks are doing it on the city level. We are hearing that folks are doing it on the statewide level today with the New York tenant block, who's taking action and rallying for a rent freeze in New York right now. And so with all of these different pieces, we want to make sure that that folks' questions are getting answered. And so I will open it up to folks that might have questions. And we see that there are some details being put in the chat as well. So yes, is there anyone that has questions to ask for our speakers? And if not, we'll make some more space for folks to share. So while we're waiting for those questions, maybe we can hear from folks what rent control can make possible for the communities that you are a part of. Is there anybody that wants to start us off?
Can I jump in here?
Yeah, and go ahead to introduce yourself too. Yeah.
Sure. My name is Bevan Francis. I'm a tenant organizer with United Tenants of Albany and organizer for National Union of the Homeless. Very proud to work alongside with Rich, who's one of our homeless union leaders. And Richard right now is currently homeless, as he expressed. He collects Social Security disability. And with that income, it's just not enough to afford even a single occupancy room here in Albany. I also went through the same situation 2 years ago, where if you're on a fixed income or if you are working part-time or for a very low wage, you just simply can't afford an apartment on your own, and services are extremely difficult to navigate, and very limited in the resources that you can access. So we need rent control in Albany as a solution to prevent eviction, but also as a solution to the homeless crisis, and across the state and across the nation.
Thank you for that. And I also saw that there's a question around, yeah, a lot of people say that reducing regulation, so reducing rent regulation, reducing regulations that corporate landlords are facing, and encouraging us to just build more housing of any kind is going to help solve the housing crisis. So can anyone talk about if new production of housing has helped at all in your communities? Isaac, I see your hand is up, so we'll go over to you.
Yeah, I mean, we had several recent experiences with that here in Lynn, where there's been a lot of upzoning, a lot of reduction of regulation, a lot of what people say is going to help. And what has that meant in practice? I mean, the tallest building in our small city downtown right now is 10 stories. It was built a few years back with a very large tax break at the local level. And it's meant, watching those public dollars go into this building, watching it get put up by mostly non-union contractors with unsafe practices. And then once it was ready to go, it was flipped very quickly to a company in Oregon, 3,000 miles away from here, that manages it from afar. And now we're seeing, these luxury rents that no one in that area can afford. It's just completely out of step with the community needs, what was built there. I mean, we saw the advertising early on that they had space inside this building for an indoor golf simulator, whatever that is. Not space for a single apartment that was affordable to people at the local level, but they had space for that. And now, a couple years later, we're seeing this constant churn of evictions from that building that was put up. So, that's what deregulation and quote unquote market production has meant here. There's a number of other buildings that have gone up on our city's waterfront that are starting to create the basis for a kind of resegregation or intensified segregation of the city, where there's, wealthier folks from outside our area coming in, settling there without any real connection to the rest of the city. So for us, this idea that things are going to trickle down and help the rest of us, and deregulation, some kind of magic bullet, it just hasn't played out in reality. What we've ended up with is, more housing that people here can't afford.
Thank you, Isaac. And I'm seeing in the chat, well, I put the question in the chat from Shelter Force. So the question is, will the day of action be addressing the loss of tenant protections coming out of FHFA at the request of landlords? And Katie, I'll pass that one to you.
Yeah, I think the day of action will cover all of the different pieces that's coming out from the Trump administration that will really harm tenants and homeless folks. And so we're definitely planning on addressing that and also putting forward our vision for what we need, which is universal rent control and green social housing.
Thanks, Katie. And are there any other questions that folks have before we begin to wrap up? Um, Okay, maybe before we wrap up, Katie, I'm gonna tap on you again. If you could give folks a little bit more about any of the events or happenings that are going to be moving in DC on the 20th. I know we're going to have a lot of tenant leaders and speakers, but if you want to speak to any more of the specifics.
Yes, we are going to be having a rally with 500 folks at from 12 to 1 in Washington, D.C. It will be at Area 3, the Robert Taft Memorial, if anybody wants to attend. And then and we will have hear from tenant leaders, houseless leaders, and also from Representative Rashida Tlaib and Representative Delia Ramirez, and potentially other federal allies that will be standing with us. And then afterwards, 500 of us are going to go in and they're going to visit their legislators and they're going to demand no budget cuts to HUD. And we'll also be planning some visits on some of the members of the T-HUD committee.
Yes, thank you, Katie. And with that, we are going to wrap up the press briefing today. Thank you, everyone, for joining the call. Thank you, everyone, for joining the call. Please be in touch with us to speak with any of our speakers from the briefing and/or any of the various cities taking action. Also, if you are interested in coming through to cover the actions happening in DC or in any other parts of the country, you can reach out to matt@righttothecity.org and we can connect you with any of the member organizations that spoke here today. And yes, we're also going to make folks available for interviews or more questions after this call. So reach out to Matt again. His email is in the chat. Thank you everyone for coming through, and we'll be sending out the recording and making that available to folks as well. Have a good rest of your day, and we hope to see you on the 20th somewhere in the country. Bye, y'all.